Welcome to the last class of the course, the International Cyber System, and today we'll discuss private actors, and I'll use it as a point of departure to consider some concluding remarks on the course, which continues some of the discussions we had in the last class on campus. So what we do today is to discuss the privatization of security in general, and this will be a way to connect international relations theories and non-state actors, or at least one of the ways to do so, and we'll consider the characteristics, the historical context of privatization of security, the reasons for privatization of security, and some of the problems associated with it. And then we'll consider some of these elements with regard to the private sector and cyber security. And the last part of the class will conclude the course, and I'll do so in three different ways. One, according to the elements of the international system, the actors, the interactions, and the structure. This will be one way to conclude the course. The second will be based on the different levels of analysis, the state, the system, and the individual. And lastly, we'll conclude the course through the paradigms, and I'll use this as a way to group together different classes we had under the main paradigms in which we used for each of these classes. So let's start with the privatization of security. Basically, the privatization of security is not something completely new, but it has changed dramatically in recent decades. So, for example, according to Deborah Avant, until the Vietnam War, most of the private companies providing security were used to work around issues such as logistics. A prominent exception was the training of pilots during World War II, given the shortage of pilots who had limited time for training the new generation of pilots. It was moved through some private companies that trained the pilots during that time, but this was the exception. Usually at that time, there was limited use of private companies, and if they were used, they relied on logistics aspects of the military work. And as I mentioned, in recent years, we see a growing reliance on private actors, and this is evident in a number of aspects regarding the activities of these companies. One is the scale of work of these companies, and we see it in different areas around the world, but a prominent example is the shift actually in the United States reliance on these private contractors. In 1991, during the first Gulf War, the ratio of soldiers and contractors was 1:58, meaning that for one personnel recruited through private security companies, there were 58 soldiers. In the second Gulf War, the ratio was 1:6, meaning that it was 10 times more. It was 10 times bigger. So it was for each 6 soldiers, there were one personnel recruited through these private security companies. So we see a significant change in the scale of this phenomena in this recent decades. In addition, we see a shift in the scope of activity. As I mentioned earlier at the beginning, the work of these companies was around logistic aspect of the military occupation, the military positions regarding kitchen, for example, maybe similar other similar logistic stuff such as deliveries or not in front, and things like that. We see that in recent decades, the ways in which these companies are used is far beyond just logistics, but also related to training of soldiers, the operation, maintenance, and training of technological system, police, and even guarding. So these include some of the professions that military personnel were engaged in the past, and now it is moved into private companies that provide these services. And lastly, another element of the activities of these companies is the globalization, is the global nature of the way in which these companies are operated. So foremost, some of the biggest companies are global companies working in more than one location and recruiting personnel from different nationality and deploying them in different areas. So there are three international elements here. First, the company, the private security company is an international company. Second, the staff of the company are international experts from different countries, recruited by their expertise and not by their nationality. And third, they are deployed in various areas around the world. So it's a global phenomenon. It's one of the manifestations of globalization in the security field. In addition, it also manifests an idea which is controversial, that security is a commodity. It's a neoliberal aspect of security, and not neoliberal as in international relations theories of not as in international relations theories and paradigms, but rather neoliberalism as manifested in as an economic perception. And here it is that the idea is that the security is something that you can purchase in the market. This has some advantages maybe, but it's also a very different way to think about security. When you think it as a commodity, you can bid, you can compete with other security providers about the service you provide, and so on. So it's a completely different perception than the traditional view of security as something that is handled by the state and through the citizens of the state that are expected to serve in the military. Although it should also be noted that in history, a long history, there are various examples of soldiers who are recruited for economic purposes rather than for ideological national interest, and there are a lot of examples for that. But in the establishment of the international order, the idea of the modern state, is that in this context, the state is relying on the security of the state is relied on the military, which is a national military, and there is the ideology that helps to recruit the personnel and the soldier rather than economic incentives given to the soldiers. So globalization is a manifestation of one of the manifestations of the privatization of security, but is also a reason for the privatization. So it is part of a global world, and in the global world, you need to act globally. Then this alludes to different aspects of behavior, including security. Second, and this is highly related to the questions of cyber, and the cyber technology is a key example of that, is the advancement of technological systems that require maintenance, training, and even operation by experts. So the expertise is not necessarily found in the military, but rather they need to buy and purchase this expertise, and who is the ones who are able to provide this expertise are the private companies that have the knowledge, have the expertise, have the experience of how to use these technologies, and can sell the abilities to the military. So this is a consequences or an outcome of the advanced technological systems, that the military has no advantage in having this kind of knowledge according to this approach, and therefore it is more useful to rely on external sources of knowledge and expertise. Second, allegedly, and I emphasized here the word allegedly, the reliance on private companies allows to save resources and to decrease the cost of the military and increase flexibility. And this is because the reliance on these actors allow to decrease the armies. You don't need a big army for a long period of time. From time to time, you need to recruit personnel, especially in emergencies, and then you can actually fire them, or not even fire them. You can just end the contract with the private company, and then you will be able to use or save some budget and resources. We'll discuss it later on, because it is questionable whether this is really save money and resources, but it allegedly one of the arguments. You don't need big armies. You don't need to pay pension for the military personnel, for soldiers and officers. You can just hire them in the market. And lastly, there is the political issue. It is much more easy to approve sending, or much more difficult, I would say, to send soldiers to a battlefield than to add another line in the budget of recruiting a contractor who will do the job. So it becomes a budgetary issue rather than a political issue. It becomes an economic question, financial question, rather than a political issue. It is much more difficult to decide to send soldiers, for example, send soldiers abroad, than to had a contract with a company providing these personnel. On the other hand, there are problems with the privatization of security, and to some of the problems I alluded earlier. First, there is the question of reliability. Well, if you send soldiers who are ideologically committed to the military service, and they are defending their territories, homeland, their families, and so on, they are much more reliable than those who send to the battlefield and serve in very dangerous places, but do it for economic incentives, for getting higher salaries and so on. So when things become becomes too dangerous, they may leave the place and go elsewhere. It is, if it's for earning money, if they will die, it won't be very useful either. So this may have a number of consequences. One is on the reliability of the forces. When the officers and the staff, or the military staff, cannot be sure that the supply would arrive, for example, because it is delivered by personnel recruited through these private companies, it may have implication for the way these things are handled. In addition, in fact, it can be very costly, because if you take into account not only the cost of the service itself, but also the cost of things that are not done properly, or things that are not done at all, it may have additional costs. And it also have associated with problems of questions of insurance, how you whether you can have insurance for these staff and personnel, whether they are available. In some period of time, it is very difficult to hire the service of these companies, because the demand is growing. For example, during the war in Iraq, it was very hard to recruit personnel, because there was a lot of competition and a lot of demand for their services. So it was difficult to place and hire these personnel in other parts of the world. So for them, it became, for some countries, it became a very big problem. In addition, there is the question of supervision. How you can supervise that the personnel are doing the exact work they are required to do, whether they do it on time, and so on. Part of the problem is that the officers that need to monitor their activities are placed remotely and cannot monitor in due time the activities of these personnel. In addition, and this is a political issue, it increases the power of the government over the parliament, because it is much more, as I mentioned earlier, much more difficult to send soldiers. When it becomes a line in the budget, it's much more difficult to supervise the government, and it also opens up a spectrum for the involvement of interest group and actors who want to lobby for the use and reliance on these kind of contractors. Lastly, there are legal issues associated with the deployment of these personnel forces. For example, which kind of law needs to regulate the behavior of these forces? On the one hand, we have the laws of the country in which the private contractor is located. It can be London, for example. The deployment of the forces can be in Iraq, but it is not the law of Iraq necessarily, but it might be the American law, which the forces are part of the military mission of the United States, for example, there. So it becomes, there is a lot of ambiguities regarding legal issues and the obligations of what is allowed and what is disallowed, whether they allowed to use weapons or not, and so on. Okay, so when we think of the implication of these issues in the context of the cyber domain, we can ask three main questions. One is why private actors are key actors in the cyber security, and there are a number of reasons for that, not necessarily different from the reasons mentioned earlier, but this is another question that we can consider as well. So which of the reasons noted above for the privatization of security are applicable and relevant to dynamics in the cyber domain? And lastly, whether the problems discussed earlier about the privatization of security are also relevant to problems in this the privatization of security in the cyber domain. So there are a number of elements here that we can discuss. Foremost, of course, private companies are key developers of the technology, and this is kind of truism to say that private companies are not the only ones that develop cyber technology, but are key among the key actors who are active in this field. There are some, of course, governmental agencies that are advancing the technology, but also a lot of the innovation is coming from the private sector, and therefore we need to rely on the private sector in this field as well. And for example, purchasing software and applications for defending the networks, defending our computers and smartphones and so on. This is something that is developed in the private sector. Although on the other hand, you can also point to the fact that there are also there are not clear borders between the private and the governmental sector, and many of the people who work for the government are moving later on to work for the private sector. It's very prominent in Israel, of course, in the Unit 8200, that after they ending their military service, they are moving to the private sectors and initiate startups and similar companies. In addition, the economic incentive is playing a significant role in shaping the field, and of course affecting the users and both the government and state agencies, but also of course other actors, competitors, and other actors who need to use the services of these companies for their own security. So economic incentives are important part of the structure of this game, and it shapes the field. For example, it incentivizes actors to develop certain products. It disincentivizes from developing other products, and of course, it also has effect on the need to allocate resources to purchase these technologies in order to advance the security of different systems, and of course to use it for offensive purposes as well. And actually, this is part of the previous point. And so state actors rely on private companies. So not only this is the developers of this technology, and then they are also affected by the economic incentives, but state actors they don't have any choice but rather to rely on these companies for various services, including for security services, and it is sometimes embedded in the products they are purchasing. Sometimes they need to add these features into the systems when they are using sensitive technologies for the military, for the other state agencies, and so on. So the reliance on non-state actors is tremendous. Also, the private sector holds many of the critical infrastructures. So, of course, there are cyber infrastructures at the end of the government, and it depends, and it varies from country to country, but electricity may be in the hands of the government, water infrastructures may be in the hand of the government, but there are also some of the key critical infrastructure that are held by the private sectors, for example, banks, health services, telecommunication services, and so on. So these are part of these technologies, these infrastructures are at the ends of the private sector, and therefore it is important for the operation of the daily base operation of the country on the one hand, but it's also a very sensitive target, and therefore states need maybe to regulate these infrastructures, but also are relying on these infrastructure for the operation of many things. So from this perspective, it can also be seen through the theory of securitization. And when we talk about critical infrastructures and the importance of the civilian infrastructures for the security of the state, we can also think and use the concept of securitization and the question of what security is, security of whom, against whom, and from which kind of threats. And of course, it clearly alludes to the question of the cyber technology, infrastructure technology that are key technologies that need to be defended. And again, it is, of course, a question of security, but it's not traditional security in terms of military security or military threats from another country, but the insecurity is much more varied, and it can be seen through the extension of the concept of security and maybe the social construct of what security is. But anyhow, it relates to the private actors who are key actors in holding and using this technology, but also as a target of regulation of security to defend these sensitive technologies. And lastly, and it can also be seen as a way to summarize this point, but also it can stand by its own, is that cyber is a dual-use technology. Almost by definition, it can be used for different purposes, and therefore it has many applications in for security, but also in the civilian and private sectors. So from this point of view, it is why we need to think of the privatization of security when we think of the cyber domain, simply because it is a dual-use technology. It can be used for different purposes by different kind of actors, and once the technology is achieved or is gained, then it can be used in different ways, and therefore it opens up different challenges. It provides, of course, opportunities, but it also, of course, create challenges and need to take actor need to take measures to address this challenge. So let me exemplify some of these elements of the importance of the private companies through the war in Ukraine, which is a very interesting example and also a puzzling. There is a puzzle here because the way in which people think about Russia cyber technology is that Russia is an advanced cyber actor, and the fact that Ukraine didn't face a significant cyber attack is it was something that acquired some scholarly attention. So people were debating why, or at least discussing why, there was no significant cyber attack of Russia on Ukraine. So on the one hand, I've been in Washington, DC a few years ago on my sabbatical, and I had a chance to go to many lectures and seminars on cybersecurity, including specifically those dedicated to Russia. And there were actually, on the one hand, those who suggested that the Russian cyber threat is overestimated, but at the same time, there are other people saying that the Russian cyber threat is underestimated. So it is not exactly clear what Russia is capable of, but many see it as a cyber superpower. And the fact that it didn't cause much damage through cyber digital means to Ukraine is a puzzle that was to discuss. So one of the explanations to the limited influence of Russia cyber attacks on Ukraine is the activity and influence of the cyber sector, and especially the voluntary work of different companies to assist Ukraine. Millman and his co-author wrote a paper in the INSS about a year ago, tried to explain these phenomena, and they were basically suggested that there were a number of examples of cyber companies, including Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and others, who assisted Ukraine in tens and hundreds of millions of dollars and helped Ukraine to limit the ability of Russia to harm its cyber infrastructures. So one way or one example is Google Assistance, which Google was asked to restrict access to some of the features on its digital maps. And it's also interesting from the point of view of what we discussed a few weeks ago about digital maps and digital geography and so on. And this is not necessarily or not only influence the cyber targets, but also targets in the kinetic domains as well, because the map can be, of course, used for regular traditional military forces. But they also asked Google to block some Russian government YouTube channels, and this in between cyber operation and information warfare operation, and it's also one of the ways in which this the cyber sector was involved in limiting Russia ability to harm Ukraine. There are also there's also the assistance of Elon Musk, who provided alternate satellite internet service Starlink after Ukraine ground communication terminal Viasat terminal were attacked, and max donation was estimated at $100 million, and these terminals were used for both civilian and military purposes, for example, for command and control, but also to compensate to back up a situation in which the terminal is not working properly. And also, they help Ukraine to contain Russian cyber attacks against these Ukrainian terminals. So this is another example of assistance to Ukraine, which helped them to limit the damage caused by potential damage caused by Russia. Amazon similarly agreed to storage data of the Ukrainian government, and interestingly, it was done not only by digital means of transportation, but also the data was transformed through physical devices to a safe place in which the data can be stored. Again, this increased the resilience of the Ukrainian government to cyber attack and provided backups for sensitive information. Again, limited the ability of Russia to cause harm to Ukraine. And lastly, companies such as Google, Microsoft, and other provided cybersecurity to Ukraine to defend its networks. For example, Microsoft assistance is estimated at $300 million. So this is a quite significant help that the Ukrainian authorities received from the private sector, and it shows again the importance of the cyber sector in a way that is quite equivalent to the challenges of threatening governments that they need to address. Another aspect of the importance of the private sector in the cyber domain concern the questions about involvement of state and how they engage or may be engaged in conflict with other states, or may be dragged into such conflicts following a clash between a private company and a foreign country. And we have a number of examples in this regard. For example, the tension between Google and China regarding the search result in Google engines, or the hack into the networks of Sony by North Korean hackers, and of course, the ability of the North Korean hackers to gain sensitive information from these networks, and in this way to sabotage Sony. One of the concerns related to these kind of situations is the ability of companies to hack back, and actually this is illegal by a number of countries. It is illegal to hack back to the source of attack, or where you think that the attack came from. This is something that the state should do. And as I mentioned, some of the countries, including Israel, is limited the ability of actors to hack back. It is something that the government should do in response to an attack, not the company or individuals. Also, or following also the fear that it may cause escalation, and this fear that things will get out of control. Another mechanism or connections between the private sectors and the government is through platforms for cooperation. For example, what is called the PPP, the public-private partnership, which allows to create mechanisms of cooperation, not only between the government and the private sector, but also among private actors and in the private sector itself. So companies can cooperate, share information about sources of threats, and also on the ways to address these challenges. So there are a number of course, problems or challenges with the privatization of security. One of them is the place of the state as the security provider. This is also something I mentioned when we talked about the theory of ontological security, as the narrative of the state as the security provider of the citizens and individuals within the state. And this is something that the state is challenging of doing in the cyber domain. And another take on this issue is provided by Miriam Dunn-Kavely, who asserts that in contrast to many other security issues, private actors are not the ones that are increasingly pushing into the traditional state security fields in cybersecurity. It is the state that is trying to reestablish its authority in a space cultivated by innovative practices of companies and consumers on the one hand, and criminal actors on the other. So in other words, it is the cyber domain that is populated by different kind of non-state actors, and the state is the one who tries to re-establish its authority in this domain. And it is, of course, a challenge because, as we mentioned earlier, there are a number of ways in which these companies and private sector is effective or very effective in operating in this domain. So let me get back now to the key questions I raised earlier about the privatization of security and the cyber domain. So why private actors are key actors in the cyber domain? We answered this quite clearly. There are economic incentives. This is a dual-use technology. This another example of advanced technological system that require expertise, and the expertise is something that is evident in the end of the private sector and not necessarily by the government. So at the end, many of the reasons noted above for the privatization of security are highly relevant to explaining dynamics in the cyber domain. On the other hand, there are also additional challenges in the cyber domain, as I mentioned in one of the last slides about what Miriam Dunn-Kavely suggested, the difficulties of state to reassert their authority in the cyber domain. So the fact that it is a domain in which non-state actors are very prominent makes the state or challenge the state narratives, the state practices, and it is not only a question of traditional security, but also of ontological security, the ability of state to maintain its narrative as a security provider, as a key actor in this domain. This is something very, very prominent, the need to be taken into account when we think of the cyber domain. Let me now turn to the conclusion of the course, and as I mentioned earlier, there are a number of ways I can go in concluding the course and what we have discussed in the last semester one way to do it is based on the questions that can still be asked, or directions for alternative ways to study the cyber domain. And this is something that I discussed in the last class on campus we had about a week ago. In addition, however, I suggested we can think of 3 additional ways through which we can summarize the discussions we had. One is based on the elements of the international system, and the international system, as I noted in the first class we had, is based on actors, interactions, and structure. So this is one way to cover a number of issues we discussed during the semester. The second is through the level of analysis. We have 3 main levels of analysis in international relations: the state level, the systematic level, and the level of individuals. We didn't talk much about the last one, but we talked about the 2 others. And lastly, we can think or discuss the course through the different paradigms. And we have 3 main paradigms we used during the semester: neorealism, neoliberalism, and constructivism. And we can use it as different point of departure to discuss the cyber domain and international relations, but also to group some of the concepts and theories we discussed during the semester. So let me start with the components of the international system. So first we have actors, and it's also a very good way to connect the ideas we talk today and the ideas we discussed during the semester. So of course, in international relations, states are prominent actors. This is evident in various ways in different domains and so on. But in the cyber domain, we cannot overlook non-state actors, and therefore these actors require much attention, which I'm not sure that main paradigms in international relations are very effective in studying. Maybe, as I'll speak later on, maybe neoliberalism is a good point of departure for this kind of discussion, but I'm not sure that it fully captures all the elements surrounding these kind of actors. In addition, we can talk of institutions as international actors in the international arena, such as international organization or international regimes as actors. The EU, for example, if we talk about important actors that affect the cyber domain, this kind of actor is able to create regulation that limit the ability of not only of state actors, but also of non-state actors, such as the policy of GDPR. In addition, we can speak about the interactions in the cyber domain, and we can think of different kinds of interactions. We can talk on the one hand of security interactions, threats, alliances. We can also talk about cooperation in the cyber domain. We can talk about economic interactions, but also on identity dynamic and the connection between different actors based on shared identities. This is something that I mentioned in the context of digital diasporas. We didn't have a class on that topic, but diasporas can communicate through digital platforms, and it's also very interesting because they can be part of the diaspora, but they can be active in the diaspora even if they are not they are in the physical location they're residing. They are not people from the specific diaspora. And lastly, we can think of the international system through the structure, and the structure of international relation is of course seen in different ways by different theories. For example, for neorealists and neoliberals, the structure is is characterized by anarchy. There is anarchy in international system, and the anarchy is shaping the behavior of actors. I will speak of that shortly when I'll summarize neorealism. But it should be noted that anarchy is not chaos, but rather it is the lack of a supreme authority above the state, and therefore it is different from hierarchy, which is allegedly characterized the domestic arena of different countries. The structure, however, can also be an ideational structure. We can think of the constitutive element of international relations at current, at least at current international system, as shaped by the idea of sovereignty. So this is a constitutive element, constitutive idea that is characterizing the international arena, and therefore it has implications or different kinds of implications for world politics. In addition, a second way to summarize this course is through the levels of analysis. In international relations, we have three main levels. We also have a categorization of 5 levels, but for the purpose of this discussion, let's have 3 levels of analysis. And the question here is, what is the focus of the explanation? Whether we focus on elements at the level of individual, or the level of the state, or the level of the system. So at the individual level, we didn't talk about it much during the course, but we can think of psychological elements shaping individual, or rational choice theory, and so on, that focus on the decisions of individuals and how they shape the international behavior of different kinds of actors. We didn't use this series much, but we did discuss explanation on the 2 other levels of analysis: the state level and the level of the system. So we can think of domestic factors at the state level as an explanation for behavior of different actors, including, for example, the membership in international regimes. For example, why actors join or refuse to join international regimes covering different issues in the cyber domain. So this is kind of a way to address and approach these questions. Another way to discuss these issues is through the international system, and here we can think of different elements that can be studied at the level above the state, and one is the structure. The structure is anarchy. This is one way to one point of departure to think of international relations, but of course there are other ways. For example, if we think of globalization or technology as a characteristic of the international system, or if we use constructivism theories, for example, we can think or use as a point of departure international norms as a way to think of the international system. In a similar way, we can think of other systemic element, such as the balance of power, which is another issue that neorealism approaches will emphasize. And the balance of power is not, of course, at the state level, because it's the balance of power at a global level. So it's the relative power of a country rather than the power itself that matters. And lastly, I want to briefly summarize each of the main paradigms. So let's start with neorealism, which is, as I mentioned, is a systemic theory which assumes that there is anarchy, and given the anarchy, the fact that there's no supreme authority above the state needs to provide security for itself, otherwise it would not be able to survive. The neorealist approach also assumes that there is one key unit in the international system, which is currently states. So currently we have states as key actors in international relations, because the assumption is that there is the system is composed of similar units, and they function in an anarchic system, and therefore they are characterized by self-behavior, because if they will not secure themselves, they will cease to exist. A key variable in this approach is the balance of power. That is the number of poles in the system. The system could be unipolar, bipolar, multipolar, and so on. Not so on. They are the only three options. But it is used as an explanation for behavior, because this is the only thing that is changes, that is change in the international arena. The other elements, the self-help, the anarchy, and the units are not changing. At least neorealism cannot explain how a state system is becoming a different kind of system. This is out of the scope of this theory. We use this theory in different paradigms, in different classes, when we talked about power. Not all the elements of power, but hard power is part of this paradigm. And most of the Terence theories are related to a realist approach. And of course, the question of the security dilemma and its implications, or the implications of the offensive defense on the security dilemma, are also things that can be approached through neorealism. However, there are two main limitations of neorealism. There are more, but there are two key challenges. One, and it again alludes to what we talked today, it is very difficult for neorealism to acknowledge the importance of non-state actors and dynamics in which these kinds of actors are involved. The second is that the actors are not relying only on hard power, but also on soft power. And again, this is very important in the cyber domain, but it remains out of the scope of neorealism. A second approach, a second paradigm is neoliberalism, and neoliberalism accepts the notion of anarchy, and in this way it is very similar to the neorealist approach. However, neoliberalism acknowledges that cooperation is feasible, and from this point of view, international institutions, international regimes, international organizations can limit the negative implications of anarchy. So states do not necessarily need to rely on self-help, but can cooperate. In addition, this approach acknowledges various kinds of non-state actors, including domestic politics, but also other kinds of actors, of course, also the private sectors, and also the existence of transnational actors such as international cooperation and international institutions. So we talked, or we can be guided by this paradigm when we are talking about of course, non-state actors as a phenomena of international relations, which we talk today, when we talk about international regimes. And also, question of sovereignty also alludes in different way to things that are derived from neoliberalism. Lastly, constructivism, and this is a completely different approach. It comes from the view of, or point of departure of non-positivistic theory, non-positivist approach. View, it has a different motivation. Rather than explaining causal connection between variables such as x causing y, it focuses on x is y. It focused on the social context that makes things what they are. So they are not tracing causal connection y, how x causing y, but rather how x is y in a certain social context. For example, how something is a security issue in a certain context. So from this perspective, the question of interpretation, language, social construction, and discourse are very important for this approach. And we discuss these issues, for example, when we talk about rethinking security, when we talk about securitization, the social construct of security and insecurity. A few of the element of the terms that we discussed are related to the question of constructivism, and also question related to international norms, especially the constitutive aspects of international norms is something that's covered by the constructivist approach, as well as some of or many of the things that we discussed when we talked about political geography and how the borders also have constitutive effects on actors and the perception of politics, and of course ontological security, which alludes to the actor's self and their identities. So these are kind of a summary of the main paradigms we used during the semester. I wish you good luck in your assignment, and bye-bye.